by the way. So I'm just starting while we let people join. Yes, good afternoon, everybody. We're just letting the people come in, and we'll be starting shortly. But sorry, Victor, you were saying.
Oh, well, that was my credit card number, so you have it now. So
brilliant. Yeah, so we'll see what the, because I know HubSpot's very hybrid, aren't they? So they're having people.
Yeah, it's even just in sort of EMEA, it used to be all everybody in Dublin or Berlin. And now, ever since the pandemic started, we have been hiring all over the place. So there's really no going back to the office for the company. Like, there literally is no office nearby for such a big share of the team now. So it suits me well, because all my team has been in Dublin forever, and I was in Berlin by myself. So I'm less of an outlier now than I used to be 2 or 3 years ago. So
yeah. That's fantastic. Well, listen, we might as well start, because it's 1 minute past, so there will be people coming in as we go. But I thought we would get going with the webinar. We want to make this so welcome everybody who's joined us, and welcome to everybody that's going to watch the recording. Today we're going to talk about how to move from Salesforce to HubSpot. And actually, this is one of a series. So one of the other webinars we did recently was when to move from Salesforce to HubSpot. And hopefully you're on that one. If you weren't, you know that we're not trying to denigrate Salesforce in any way. We think Salesforce is clearly a brilliant bit of software, but we also recognize it's not right for everybody. So today's webinar content is very much around, for those people that are thinking of making the move, actually how do they go about doing it. And I think really what we want to get across today is that the process of moving, or you'll probably hear the word migration in the next 30, 40 minutes quite a lot. So the process of migrating from Salesforce to HubSpot needn't be very difficult, and certainly shouldn't be a barrier to making the switch if that's what you decide to do. So joining me today, I'm really pleased to say we've got Viktor from HubSpot. Viktor is based in Berlin. Viktor, you've been with HubSpot for 5 years, which is as long as we've been going in business. So we're all celebrating our 5th anniversary this year, which is great.
Oh, congratulations.
And Viktor, tell us a little bit about your role and how you help HubSpot customers.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, my first day in the office launch party in Berlin. I've been based in Berlin ever since. Most of my colleagues in Dublin. I'm moving to a bit of a new role right now, but until very, very recently, just a few weeks ago, I was a technical consultant at HubSpot. So it's part of the professional services team, working with many of the kind of most technical customers that HubSpot has. Often involved in planning custom integrations, but also things like portal migrations, consolidations, or any other sort of technical projects. So I'm not a pre-sales sort of person. I'm not a marketing kind of person, so I'll probably be off message for half of this conversation. But it also means I can sort of report from the front line quite a bit. So.
That's brilliant, Viktor. Thank you so much for joining us. So we've got the inside track, as it were, or someone inside HubSpot to give their perspective. And then I'm pleased to say we've got Tommy Price from our team, from the Boom team. Tommy is our head of our CRM team and very much lives and breathes all things CRM migrations, implementations, and integrations. Tommy, welcome.
Yeah, great to have you all on board. So really where my role is focused is very much on the day-to-day. So all of the technical areas of HubSpot, specifically CRM related. So looking to scope, plan out, and then work with our implementation team to roll out custom integrations, native integrations, migrations. We work with Salesforce a lot as well. So
there you go. Thanks, Tommy. And just a bit about us, we're a HubSpot Elite partner. I'd like to say that we are experts in HubSpot. We've been going 5 years. We only do HubSpot. We've only ever done HubSpot. We probably only ever will do HubSpot because we love it so much. So if you need any help, you know where to come. In terms of the agenda, here's the agenda. Quickly, bit of an intro into kind of kind of precursor issues around moving or migrating. But overall, we want this to be very much a conversation. Just briefly on, you know, the reason why I think HubSpot is so successful, and the mantra that we all talk about a lot and believe in, is bringing sales, marketing, and service together. And HubSpot does that when you have all the different hubs that HubSpot has. I think if you're using another CRM and a different marketing tool that don't necessarily plug in very well together, I think you're missing an opportunity, because that alignment between these roles and these functions is critical. I think 3 reasons. Number 1, genuinely have a single source of truth around the customer, so we can have all of their interactions from when they became a lead through to the sales process, through to post customer service and success, all in one record, which is pretty cool. I think there's massive efficiencies in terms of data transfer and accuracy, and also time spent doing stuff. So you're working in one system rather than multiple systems that do all these things. And I think the other thing that can't be underestimated is attribution. So if we have information about marketing and where the marketing lead came from, and then we also have all the information about what deals closed from that account or those contacts in one place, then attribution to actual sales values and revenue is instant. So that's pretty cool. So that's what I say. And, you know, there's lots of different reasons, and people on the call today might also fit into this. Lots of different reasons about why you're thinking of moving from Salesforce to HubSpot. Maybe you're already using HubSpot on the marketing side, and you think, do you know what, it's probably time that we, despite the brilliant integration with HubSpot and Salesforce, you might think it's time that actually the other features of the HubSpot CRM, we might as well all go all in on HubSpot. That makes sense. We speak to quite a lot of people who are using Salesforce and have used Salesforce over many years, and it's just bloated. It has just got out of control. Partly because Salesforce is so customizable, and people, and there's lots of CRM, Salesforce admin people and consultants that will make it very customized and big projects. And you get to the point where it's just kind of unwieldy, and HubSpot isn't like that. People, number 3, maybe you've got a kind of key person on the Salesforce side that understood the system, understood Salesforce, it's gone. So you're kind of wondering actually how it all works. So there, and there's other reasons as well. So Viktor, I mean, is that common to some of your experiences in terms of the kind of arguments around why you might move?
Yeah, I think one of the points is really kind of interesting, which is customers that are already have a foot in the door on the HubSpot side, right? Like where the marketing team is already in HubSpot. That's a special case, obviously, but it's actually very, very common. And that kind of tells you a little bit about how much affinity is there between these systems, right? Like it's a very, very big group of customers that use both systems. It's a lot of customers who move from one system into another. There's a lot of Salesforce expertise. Some were baked into HubSpot teams and so on. So these universes are actually quite close together. I think is a bit of something to be aware of.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you. Before we get into the migration process and what that looks like, it's probably worth just a little bit of terminology, isn't it, guys? Because I like to say, you know, use a phrase, you call it tomato, we call it tomato. We're talking about the same thing, essentially. So in Salesforce, they talk about leads and contacts. And obviously, for those using Salesforce, you'll know a lead is basically someone who's never bought anything from you. And a contact is just someone who's potentially got the potential to be a customer of yours or buy something from you, have some sort of purchase history. In HubSpot, we'd like to keep it simple. That's just a person. That's just a contact, which kind of makes sense. You call it opportunity, we call it deal. I like that because lots of things are opportunities, but you know, we can get really excited about opportunities as a concept, but actually a deal, we all know what a deal is. That's when money's going to change hands. You call it accounts, we call it companies. You You call it fields, we call it properties. Guess what? We call it campaign, you call it campaign. So that's good. Victor and Tommy, does this come up, the language, does that get confusing for people when they're doing the migrations?
Yeah, it is like a lot of the terminology is so closed, and when there's discrepancy, it can confuse people a lot. I think this kind of simple breakdown is actually really eliminating. I think really the interesting one is that the distinction between lead and contacts. That's really a big one. It's a big complication in the integration that we built as well. So there's lots of engineering sort of cleverness that goes into bridging that gap a little bit. But in actual fact, what it means is if you make the switch, you typically create deals or opportunities at an earlier stage, and then you work off deals rather than working off leads. So there's like some subtle shifts that you typically make when you move around, but basically it's mostly just terminology.
Yeah, and I would say as well, particularly for those customers that are already using the Salesforce HubSpot integration, the most common user journey there seems to be, okay, a contact is qualified in HubSpot either through a high intent conversion or maybe there's lead scoring behind it. From that point onwards, it's synced across to Salesforce as a lead. And then from that point onwards, it's converted to a contact with an opportunity and an account. So it's just getting used to that terminology shift when you're migrating over to HubSpot, I would say.
Brilliant. Thanks, guys. So let's talk about preparing for migration. So I think it's fair to say, Victor, that we want to paint a picture today of it being a very straightforward, managed process. As part of that, you do need to do some preparation, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. I was actually sort of, when I was giving this some thought, I was thinking very hard of, like the big things you have to keep in mind and the big checklists and so on. To be honest, I couldn't think of like that many, really profound blockers or anything like that. So this is a short list of things that you really want to give some thought to. So I think one of the really strong recommendations I have is to, functionally speaking, what usually happens is you run some migration and then that has happened, and then your team start working in a new system. That makes complete sense. But what I want to encourage is to flip that around a little bit and start playing or engaging early with the system you're moving to, because actually the barriers are not very high. So to give you an example, you could sign up for a developer account right now. It's free. You create a test portal. You connect it to the HubSpot Salesforce integration and link it to a Salesforce sandbox, right? That's like, you could do this right now in 5 minutes, and you'd probably have a bunch of data pulled in from Salesforce into a HubSpot environment that's pretty much fully functional. And you could sort of play around there right now with all the tools. That is, I think, a more productive sort of jumpstart than trying to, throw a technical team at the task before you even give it some consideration. So that's sort of the hands-on mentality, I think, that pays off. And that also exposes you to, the kind of HubSpot best practice, I call it here. So just, terminology, the way teams interact, just some of the conventions in the UI and so on, that just helps you visualize a little bit where the journey is going, as opposed to thinking of the migration as purely an abstract kind of database sort of migration. So that's kind of like a really important, I think, sort of mindset recommendation I have. And then the third point here, I think that's the only real kind of hard potential blocker that I could think of. So that is something you really want to give a lot of thought to before you set in motion and write timetables and so on. So you want to think about the integrations you use right now. So basically other systems that your Salesforce instance is talking to right now. And you want to think about how you want to rewire all of that so that it can talk to HubSpot in the future. In a lot of cases, that will be easy, right? You just find a corresponding HubSpot integration and you're good to go. That's in other cases, maybe it's difficult. Maybe it's an integration you built yourself, or it's like a MuleSoft connector or something like that. In that case, that is what you really want to focus on, thinking through, okay, how are we going to rewire that. How are we going to turn this into a HubSpot connector? Who can help us with this? Talk to somebody like Tommy or somebody like my colleagues in Dublin. That is the sort of the hard part. After that, I think migration can actually be quite painless. So, Tommy, is that sort of like, am I understanding the complexity here, or what's the experience on that?
No, I completely agree with that, Victor. I mean, what I would say is for those integrations that are already being used in Salesforce, HubSpot have the app marketplace. It's a super flexible resource, so it's worth checking out whether those integrations already have native connectors as you're coming over to HubSpot. And, in other times as well, you may find that some integrations that were being used in Salesforce are no longer needed because HubSpot have that functionality inbuilt, just to name a few examples, the meeting booking tools, the quoting tools, etc. So yeah, there's a lot of potential there as well. Now, what I would also say is when it comes to preparing for the migration, it's actually thinking about, right, what data are we currently using inside Salesforce that we need to pull across to HubSpot? And that's where you can start to join up the dots. So actually preparing what we would call a mapping document, which is essentially just a glorified spreadsheet. Being able to map the fields line by line, whether you're using, connecting contacts to leads, opportunities to deals, and accounts to companies as well.
Okay, that's great. Can I just unpack some of what you guys both said then? So let's start with the user adoption piece, Victor, because I was really interested in what you're saying here about people getting hands-on. So let's assume you've not used HubSpot in a CRM before, and you're going for example. So user adoption is a big thing, actually, isn't it, in all this? Because I mean, we've worked with people who are, if you're migrating your business over from one system to another, there will be a bunch of people that are really excited about that. There'll be a bunch of people that are a bit ambivalent about it, and there'll be some people that don't want to do it. That's obviously challenging. So you kind of got to bring people along the journey, haven't you? You've got to kind of bring them along and say, look, you're used to using Salesforce. It does these things. This is how you do it in HubSpot. Look, it's the same thing. It looks different, but it basically is your pipeline, for example. And if you want a forecast, you click here and you get that. So Victor, would you point people to things like some of the certificates in the HubSpot Academy and things like that, as well as going into dev portals?
Yeah, it's a really important point you're raising there. So, I mean, to be completely honest, a very common situation would be like where, like a marketing team is completely sold on moving to HubSpot. They can't wait to move off Pado or whatever. So that's sort of cool. But then there's maybe like a giant sales team and, they're chasing numbers all day. They don't have time to just, they don't want to, they'd rather not maybe make a switch at all. Or they just take time to learn. That's not an uncommon maybe context in which these things are being planned, and certifications are definitely a way to go. So again, we could put this into Salesforce terminology. So I think Salesforce would have the trailblazer or a trailhead. I think, is that what it's called? Tommy, am I remembering this correctly? Yeah, like I think that's a self-learning sort of website or program that Salesforce is running. We have the Academy, so the HubSpot Academy. Lots of stuff going on there. HubSpot community forum is also a helpful place. So by all means, get started with maybe the foundational sort of videos and so on. It's a good place to start. I still think that really just jumping into the portal is it's not such a scary thing to do. Like Salesforce, a Salesforce developer account is a scary place to be if you don't know what's going on, right? There's a lot of stuff there. Even like, oh, where are the contacts? Can take me like 10 minutes of Googling when you do the first time. Whereas a HubSpot, the UI, it's not quite as deep. It's not quite as daunting. So you should be able to sort of find your way around as long as there's some data in there. So if you do some very basic things, hopefully some of it should be more self-explanatory, and you might not need the sort of formal certification, but you do need a bit of buy-in from, I guess, the teams involved. So if you have, somebody from sales, somebody from marketing, maybe more like an admin persona on the Salesforce team, if those kind of people all spend a bit of time exposing yourselves to a test environment in HubSpot, I think that goes a very long way.
Yeah. Tommy, would you add anything to that?
No, what I would say is, yeah, exactly what Victor said. I mean, it's the sooner you can get onto HubSpot, start experimenting, get understanding the user interface, the better.
Cool. Actually, it's the Salesforce Trailhead.
Trailhead. Okay, so
Yeah.
Trailblazer, I think, got a certification or something. I don't know. Anyway, everything starts with trail. It's actually very clever. Yeah.
And so to build on that, the points there about user adoption, I think that when we're doing some of our bigger migrations and stuff, there's the concept of onboarding as well, which people may or may not know about. So onboarding is basically getting everything set up and getting your team trained up. So one point I should probably make, Tom, isn't it, is that when we do migrations for customers, it's often part of an onboarding. So it's often part of the service delivery. And what goes with that is actually the training and the support for the salespeople. So just to build on what was said there, I think there's a couple of important things that we'd recommend. Normally there's a cross-functional project team, which Victor alluded to, that you want in place at your end. I think you need a partner like ourselves to do the onboarding and as part of that then is the orientation and the training of the sales team. So making sure they're really familiar with all the functions. And then I would say there is the crucial time milestone, which is the switch over, essentially. What I mean by that is the switch over where you stop using Salesforce and start using HubSpot. That's really critical because otherwise you end up having, if that isn't managed properly, then you end up having people putting stuff in Salesforce and HubSpot, and then it all just gets a bit messy. So I think that's a critical timeline that everyone has to work to. Victor, going back to integrations, am I right in saying that the scenario you come across is if I've got Salesforce and I've plugged it into my custom, another database, right? And you're used to the information from the other database going into Salesforce, then going to Pardot. By obviously taking Salesforce out of the equations, we need to now work out how that information goes from the other database straight into HubSpot. So then you're looking at, is that what you mean by the integration there?
Yeah, exactly. So it could be maybe you have like a service team on Zendesk right now or something like that. So we want those Zendesk tickets or something like that to show up on the correct contacts and be linked to whatever is going on in these individual records. So right now there's some connector between Salesforce and Zendesk. And if you make a switch from Salesforce to HubSpot, well, actually in this case, you might even consider just moving to Service Hub, which is a kind of a Zendesk kind of equivalent in HubSpot. But let's say you love Zendesk, then you would look into a Zendesk HubSpot connector
just working out. I think you said previously, get a list together, audit what integrations you've got, and make sure that they're all there. Okay.
Sorry, actually, I just that switchover point you made earlier. That's really interesting in this case, because there are definitely cases where this goes horribly wrong, where basically the switchover sort of ends up happening so late that all the onboarding conversation has kind of passed by that point, and then suddenly on your own with this. That's really bad. So having that kind of, so I think, for example, Boom would do both, right? You would do the migration and you would do the onboarding. So you kind of manage that timeline. So that's a really good synergy. But even if you were doing, let's say, onboarding provided by HubSpot directly, then you would really have to be paying attention that the migration happens in a way that actually is compatible with all the onboarding training you plan to do. So you're not left on your own onboarding all your people. That's really important. And also, if that is a problematic sort of thing to manage, you can do that a little bit gradually in HubSpot because the integration is there. So in principle, let's say you already have a marketing team in Salesforce right now, you could do things like, let's say you have a BDR team, right? They're sales, but they're not quite sales. So like a pre-sales kind of team, you can move them to HubSpot from Salesforce, have them get acclimatized, and then move the sales team afterwards. There are things to stagger this a little bit if you have to.
Makes sense. Perfect. Okay. So let's get into the migration process itself then. And really, I'm going to hand over to Tommy now just to talk us through what that might look like. Over to you, Tommy.
Absolutely. So when it comes to the migration process from Salesforce to HubSpot, there are a few considerations that need to take place first. So migrating your fields from Salesforce to HubSpot. So what we would always recommend and what we work with our customers to do is actually put together, as I referred to earlier, a mapping document. So understanding what fields and what objects are currently being used inside of Salesforce and what we need to bring over to HubSpot. Now, when it comes to migrating fields, there are standard fields inside of HubSpot, which will match up to Salesforce one-to-one because they already exist. There's also some fields which are standard in HubSpot, which will have a slightly different naming convention. So it's just worth going through those in a lot of detail. So one, for example, would be HubSpot call it deal name versus Salesforce will refer to it as opportunity name or opportunity stage. So just being confident on the terminology differences there. But then thirdly, as well, when it comes to migrating fields, we essentially need to create all of the custom properties that exist in Salesforce, but do not already exist inside of HubSpot. So that's a process of going into HubSpot and creating those with the correct field types, making sure it's a one-to-one match. Now, aside from that as well, there are evidently some assets inside of Salesforce which cannot be migrated over, and therefore we need to recreate them inside the system. So just to name a few, we've got email templates, landing page templates, reports even. So whilst we can't effectively migrate those assets over, they can be recreated inside the system. And in fact, it's a really good opportunity to refine what you already have inside Salesforce and reinvent it inside of HubSpot. The second point there also refers to workflows. So I believe inside Salesforce, they call them automations. Again, this is another example of an asset we recreate inside of HubSpot. So just to name a few, you may have some lead assignment processes inside of Salesforce whereby any new leads come in need to be routed to the right sales team or region. So we would need to recreate that inside of HubSpot. And the same goes for any automated email sequences, notifications internally with the team.
Yeah, I think, can I just add to that, Tommy? Is that all right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think actually if we take one step back, I think one thing to keep in mind is that what's happening here is really not that uncommon, right? There's a lot of people going, through migrations from Salesforce to HubSpot, from HubSpot to Salesforce. This is not just like the mechanics are something where there's a lot of expertise, a lot of experience. So a dedicated solution partner like Boom would be an example of somebody who has a lot of experience on this. But even within HubSpot, there's a lot of Salesforce expertise and so on. So a lot of familiarity. So that sort of would be maybe like a preliminary thing to point out. Then I would like to amplify what the last point that Tommy made, which is that there are things that you need to rebuild because it makes no sense, right? Like there's no one-to-one correspondence between a Salesforce flow and a HubSpot workflow. They are corresponding tools, but they're somewhat different. So there's no one-to-one translation. So you do want to rebuild, for example, your workflow automation in some way. It can mirror what you were doing before, but it will be a bit different. And I think exactly like you said, Tommy, in a lot of cases, that's actually a really nice opportunity to maybe shed some stuff that's actually still just sort of floating around, no longer a priority, maybe slim down some of the assets you have, get rid of properties you no longer use actively, maybe use some clever features in HubSpot to just piggyback on what's already baked into the tooling and so on. So it can be quite liberating to actually go through that process and sort of like see the sort of shiny 2.0 version of your CRM on the other side.
We're on mute, Tommy.
In terms of the third point there, where it says create custom timeline objects, again, HubSpot we've talked a bit about creating the properties or fields as Salesforce referred to them, but HubSpot also have timeline events which sit inside the record, whether that's a deal, contact, or company. Now, again, when it comes to those, we can build them. So a couple examples of that would be page views or form submissions. Those are actually events that are time stamped rather than field information as such. So it's just making note of those as well.
Yeah, and that's a really important point, because a lot of these things going forward will just show up anyway, right? Like a page view or form submission, that's not really something that requires any work. HubSpot would capture all of this automatically, so it's not usually a problem. But going back, they're not typically migrated, right? So there will be some things, some, for example, like the contact timeline, which is kind of like a log, like a Facebook feed, right, of everything happening. You can't really fully backfill that to the beginning of time. That's not really a thing. So even though the properties and the current state of a contact, let's say, will be migrated over, you don't have its full history out of the box. So oftentimes, exactly like Tommy is saying, like having maybe a custom timeline object, or even just importing a note so that you have some context of the prehistory of a contact, can be a very powerful way to sort of summarize maybe what was going on in the past. Another example would be, let's say your sales folks like routinely check the history of an address field to see, like, oh, this person used to be they used to live in Dublin, now they live in London. That's really important for some reason to the sales conversation. Well, if that thing lives in the history of the property and it's super important, and the history doesn't fully come over, well, that's not a problem. You just create maybe a custom property to capture that history. So as long as you have somebody who understands both systems, like a good solution partner, or maybe some in-house expertise, or a specialist from HubSpot you work with, you can sort of make these decisions strategically to mitigate that a little bit.
Nice. Thanks, guys. And Tommy, this diagram is quite nice because actually it just visually shows how everything works together. And one thing I've got for you is tell us a little bit more about the custom objects.
Yeah, exactly. So inside Salesforce, more oftentimes than not, people are using custom objects that don't exist inside of HubSpot. Now, actually something that was recently rolled out in the last couple of years by the standard HubSpot connector is it does now, in fact, support custom objects. So where you are currently using those custom objects inside of Salesforce, they can be, and we do recreate them inside of HubSpot as well to support the data coming in from Salesforce.
Nice.
Yeah, this is actually one point where terminology is biting us a little bit again, because there's actually a ton of standard objects in Salesforce that, for the purposes of HubSpot, also can count as a custom object. That's a bit weird. But what I mean here is that there's actually, like I have it here in front of me. It's literally dozens of Salesforce objects, I don't even know what they are. Like, I have a call center object here and a campaign member object, lots of things. I don't even know what they are, but I could add them to the integration here, and they will be pulled into HubSpot as a HubSpot custom object. So in that way, actually just setting up the integration, which is really built for continuous sync, but using that to sort of power the first step of integration, can actually pull in a lot of stuff from Salesforce. So if you're worried about stuff that's not listed here on the Salesforce bubble on this slide, you think, oh, this is key for us, chances are you can actually pull it in with the out-of-the-box tooling we have. And you can try it out in 5 minutes, and then you know for sure, and it doesn't cost you anything, and it doesn't, yeah, like I mentioned earlier.
Nice, thanks, Victor. Tom, is there anything else you were going to add to this one?
No, what I would also say is, at this stage, when you're doing the migration, it's worth actually just sitting down and going through all of those objects inside of Salesforce. What is mission critical versus what can you do without? And you may find there are some objects in there that just aren't being used by the team at all. So within this diagram, you can see some of the standard ones and the most common ones, so contacts, companies, deals, etc. For those objects that aren't being used, you may decide, look, we don't even need to migrate them over to HubSpot because we can start clean slate.
Nice.
I just want to say it's a really nice diagram as well. So whoever built this, really pretty.
Yeah, it is. It does the job, doesn't it? It's really good. Okay, let's talk about the migration.
So when it comes to the migration of data, there are a number of options that you can go forward with, and we use day to day. But the first one is and the most simplest version is the CSV import. So that is quite simply taking an export of your Salesforce data and using the HubSpot importing tool to match up the columns and import it straight into the system. Now, this is the least complex route, but there are some limitations with this. For example, you can only import the standard objects. So any engagements, notes, activities, they wouldn't be able to be imported. So we find this is the most effective solution for those people that have maybe a smaller HubSpot license and they're only really using the very bare bones of Salesforce. And then what's also worth going into a bit more detail about is actually the standard integration with HubSpot and Salesforce. So the connector, you can actually leverage the integration, the native integration that is, to import all of your data across from Salesforce into HubSpot. So we use this on a very common basis as well, and it's a very good solution. And what it really allows you to do is match up all of the field mappings between HubSpot and Salesforce, do a one-time import, and this really gives you all of your data in the system. Viktor, do you have anything else to add to that?
Yeah. Yeah, I'd like to add one point, which is that actually this list looks a little bit scarier than it should be, because for even the last point, like utilizing APIs, which is kind of like, the most customizable, like kind of like low level sort of way to talk to pull data into HubSpot. Even that is actually made easy by dedicated sort of self-service integrations that exist, right? These are third-party providers like TrueJ or Import2. Those would be two big names. I'm not saying they're the best ones, but they're the names that I'm familiar with. It's a cost-effective way to transfer data, and all they do is they basically just provide a nice UI, a nice user experience to pull data into your HubSpot portal using our APIs. So basically, it's a wrapper around our APIs, and because you're only migrating once, that's usually the way you want to go, rather than having some engineer build something from scratch. Why would you do that if this is a ready-made sort of a process that's been made as convenient as possible? So it's very rare that somebody actually has to touch APIs sort of themselves in this process, is my experience.
Yeah, and I would also add to that just to say, if we do come across a use case whereby we've completely overstretched the limitations of the standard connector, the CSV imports, and potentially some of those third-party connectors aren't a viable solution, we also have in-house developers that can do custom migrations using the HubSpot API as well.
Absolutely, that's fantastic. So they're almost like a spectrum, aren't they? Starting at the top is the easiest, and going to the bottom is the hardest, but there's loads of different ways of doing it. And Tommy, we try and be quite hot on quality assurance at Boom, because we're talking about data. You don't want to overwrite data, you don't want to delete data, you don't want the data to go in the wrong places. The automation fires off an email to the wrong person. So tell us about QA.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the post-migration quality assurance is definitely the most frequently neglected stage we see with any migration. What we would always recommend is to do a post-migration audit. So that's actually taking a look at the data and the small subset that you've brought across, just to see, okay, has all of the data transferred across correctly? did any of the fields have a mismatch, i.e., okay, maybe there's a date format that just didn't match up correctly. In fact, the HubSpot connector with Salesforce does a really good job at identifying some of those sync health issues.
Yeah. Nice. So there's obviously people will get these slides and they'll get some other things which I'll talk about in a minute. But that's almost a set of questions that we would encourage people to ask themselves, Tom, isn't it?
Yeah.
Can I add one point to this slide? Sorry, just so I agree QA is important. I mentioned there's some things that if they are missing need to be rebuilt manually and so on. But what I would add is that if you really shut down the Salesforce instance, you can usually it's usually a good idea to also just sort of make some kind of backup, right? That's not that difficult in HubSpot, in Salesforce. There's a ton of backup solutions. If you only run them once, it's not a lot of money. So having some kind of data dump of whatever is in Salesforce is a good idea, regardless. It's probably a good idea right now, even if you're staying on Salesforce. So if you really move off Salesforce and you have that kind of, sort of curated migration, shaping everything to fit HubSpot and so on, you're in a great place. But, if 5 years from now, you're trying to figure out, oh, actually, what was that in Salesforce back then? Having some kind of repository just for peace of mind, in my opinion, and maybe I'm just too conservative about data retention. I don't know, but that's what I would do, right? Connect Fivetran to BigQuery or something like that. You can do it in 10 minutes, run it once, and then just hold on to that one backup copy, and then you can sort of shut down your Salesforce with peace of mind. That would be, I think, that's part of a good sort of procedure, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's a really good option because I don't know if it's a bit like clearing out your loft, isn't it, at home? You sort of think, oh, everything I've got to keep it. I'm going to put it in the loft, and then 5 years later, you go in your loft and you think, well, why have I still? I've never ever touched it since. But it's the peace of mind knowing it's there.
Exactly.
So totally with you, yeah. Tommy, we're getting towards the end now, so I think you've got a couple of points on this fantastic situation that the HubSpot customer's now in. The migration has happened. Everything is in the right place. They're all happy. The sales guys are closing deals. Any other thoughts that they should have after that migration?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say one of the first points as well is creating a data management plan. So oftentimes you've migrated all of your data over from Salesforce to HubSpot. You need to check whether there are any duplicate records. So HubSpot have some really good tools for that. Just one example is the deduplication tool. So you can actually go in and see, okay, do we have any duplicate accounts or companies? Any contacts that need to be merged. So making sure you're consistently managing that data over a consistent period, whether that's once a quarter, once every month, just to make sure you're on top of it. And a year doesn't go down the line and suddenly your data's gone out of control, because moving over to HubSpot is a really good opportunity to put those best practices in place. And then what I would also say is the HubSpot onboarding. So once your data is inside the system, it's actually making sure everyone understands all of the HubSpot tools inside the system. So what we would typically do is have a very intensive training program, which is tailored towards everyone's job roles and how they need to use HubSpot.
I think that's a really good point, Tommy, because one thing I've realized is that probably because of the size and complexity of Salesforce and its longevity, there are lots of people out there called Salesforce admins. And there's less HubSpot admins. I think there's less HubSpot admins because we haven't been around so long, but also it's not as complicated. Nonetheless, I would say, Viktor and Tommy, please agree or disagree with me on this, is that you still need somebody who performs that role, who knows all the settings, knows how to bring on new users, how to use permission sets and various controls and all that sort of stuff. So I think having somebody, and perhaps we should have brought this up earlier, I would say you almost need to appoint an admin right up front.
Yeah, that's a really important point, and I agree. Probably maybe this should even be part of kind of the preparatory stage, right? Where you actually have, one person that makes sure that it all is, ideated before it happens and so on. Definitely 100% true that, Salesforce admin is such a kind of crystallized kind of thing, and you need to have it, and you need to pay 6 figures for it, and so on. It's it's a thing, whereas HubSpot admin tends to be a part of what somebody is doing. It's not typically somebody's full-time persona or job description. Sometimes it is, sometimes it is warranted, but oftentimes if you have like the Salesforce go-to person, yes, they play the role of admin, but they usually, they have, it might not be that there's other stuff they can do. So it would not be uncommon to have like a marketing manager or a sales manager who's also the admin, and sort of both of those things fit into their fit into their job description. Yeah, I think that's definitely true. I think it's also true that maybe it puts a little bit of shifts a little bit responsibility to like other managers and teams as well to, for example, stay on top of some of the releases. Like that's almost like a, yeah, I guess to be completely honest, this is something that's a little bit different in HubSpot and Salesforce, right? In Salesforce, you might have something like these staggered releases where, oh, now it's like summer 22 release coming out, and the admin knows about it 4 months in advance, and then they can decide when to make things available and so on. HubSpot is a bit more sort of agile, and things are just sort of coming out when they're ready. So it does mean that maybe individual users see new tools cropping up or updates to the tools coming up, and they sort of train. It's a little bit less centrally managed through an admin, as folks may be used to in Salesforce. So yeah, is that your experience as well, Tommy? Or
yeah, I mean, what I can say to that really is just, making sure you're subscribed to product updates.
Right.
They are very consistent at HubSpot, and it's worth keeping ahead of the game. So you don't suddenly log into your portal one day and see a completely new hub, for example. But I think HubSpot do a really good job at voicing those product updates as long as you know where to find them.
Yeah. Another point to make on that issue is that you really want to know the touch points you have with HubSpot, right? Actually, HubSpot is pretty heavy on service and, giving you human contacts in the company and so on. So even if you have a trusted solution partner who does your onboarding, who does your migration, who might be, working with you continuously, even then you have access to, for example, the HubSpot tech support team. Create as many tickets as you want. They will help you. They will try chat, email, phone, whatever. So there's fewer things that need to be escalated to an admin, maybe in the HubSpot universe, than you might be used to from another system. So the support team is an example. Your sort of success manager, they might have slightly different job titles depending on, but you definitely have some kind of contact in HubSpot as well that has time for you. You do want to have those regular conversations. You do want to have awareness across people that need to talk to these touch points, just so that you actually get to the information and you know who to reach out to if you want to ask some tough questions or need some context for something that's happening in your portal or in the sort of product releases.
Brilliant, guys. That's incredibly useful and insightful. We've been kind of doing questions as we've been going along. We haven't had any questions from the audience, which is fine. Absolutely not a problem. I just wanted to sort of bring us to a close now and say there's really, as we've talked about, and obviously, we're here and we're hosting the webinar, we can help anybody that's thinking of making this move, whether you're completely new to HubSpot or whether you're using the Marketing Hub or Service Hub or CMS and you want to start using the CRM. We've got lots of examples of organizations, quite big organizations, that we've helped make that transition. We would love to have a conversation with anyone that's thinking about making the move, or in the middle of the move, or just about to start the migration. We're happy to chat to everybody. So please reach out to us and we'll be happy to book up a call, or Tommy or myself, or some of the other team members. And the other thing to say is, if you haven't got it already, make sure you get hold of our Salesforce migration guide. It's free and it's available to anybody that, you know, is thinking about that process, and it's very hands-on. So really, guys, I just particularly want to thank Viktor for dialing in from Berlin with us today and sharing your expertise. Thanks very much, Viktor.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it, and I think it's, yeah, I mean, our partner ecosystem is really, you know, part of, I think, what makes it seamless and sort of inviting to join the HubSpot universe. So I'm delighted that companies like you are around to kind of spread the message. I do want to say, you know, I love Salesforce. You know, I after this kind of thing, I was worried, like, oh, did I oversell anything? HubSpot is awesome. Salesforce is awesome. And, you know, there's migrating is great. HubSpot is a very happy place for a lot of, you know, folks that maybe feel there was, you know, too much depth, too much complexity to maybe their Salesforce organization. So that's great. But if you decide to maybe split and have your marketing team work in Salesforce, your service team work in HubSpot, or sorry, other way around, that's also great. A big spectrum and lots of happy HubSpot customers that are Salesforce customers and so on. So it's a big world out there. And yeah, thanks for having me, and thanks for sticking with us through the webinar.
Yeah, thanks, Viktor, and thank you, Tommy, as well. Thanks very much. We'll be out in Boston next week, Tommy, won't we, at the Inbound 2022 conference? So I'm sure we'll be talking a lot more about migrations and CRM.
Oh yeah, say hi to Obama from me. I can't make it this time, so
yeah, Obama will be there. There is a whole track on CRM, isn't there, Tommy? I think so.
Yeah, definitely.
Watching online or going to be there, and you really are properly in CRMs, there is a whole series of talks on it. So we'll see you there. All right, everybody, thanks very much for joining, and we'll make sure the recording is sent out to you, and enjoy the rest of your day.
All right. Thank you so much again, and thanks to everybody. Take care. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers. Bye.